The third overall draft pick is cursed. That is something that I hear around this time of year in the NFL, just about every single year. Uh, Whether it's the first overall pick, the second overall pick, some draft pick is cursed. You don't want your team to have that draft pick, right? Well, I'm Gabe with Franchise Tagged, and today I'm going to be looking into the validity of that claim that any draft pick is cursed. And we're going to be doing that by kind of going over every single draft pick from 2000 to 2021. So that's 22 drafts, and we're going to be looking over the first 5 picks of each draft. And there are a couple of things to note. I also think that there's a couple of things that are blown out of proportion a little bit. So just starting off with the first overall picks, you can see it on the right over there. It's the first column on the left. It is labeled pick 1, as first overall picks are. And I think somewhat predictably, it does have the highest concentration of what I have considered to be tier 1 players. So I've split these players up into 3 groups. You'll notice some blue highlights as well, but we'll get to those in a minute. So tier 1 is that they either lived up to their expectations or they exceeded their expectations. And I think it's kind of difficult for a top 5 pick to exceed expectations, because as a top 5 pick, you have the highest expectation set on you. So I think putting a separate group of players who exceeded their expectations is a little bit misleading with top 5 picks, because it's just really tough to do. Then we've got the middle tier, the orange highlights. Those are the disappointing picks. I wouldn't call them whiffs, but I definitely wouldn't call them hits. There's a little bit of, there's some higher end guys in that tier, and there's definitely some lower end guys in that tier as well. And then we've got tier 3, your Jamarcus Russells, your straight whiffs that do happen, but they obviously, predictably, are the least common of the 3 tiers. And this is all just my opinion on what tier I put guys into. I tried to kind of explain it a little bit. Disappointing, I considered to be a starter for a team or a meaningful player on that team for at least 3 seasons, but not like multi-time Pro Bowler or not first team All-Pro. So getting back to the first overall picks, highest concentration of tier 1 players was taken first overall. It was 12 out of the 22 first overall picks over the past, not the past 22 drafts. That's another thing I did was I cut it off at 2021, because that's where we can actually start getting into the grading of these players and seeing whether or not they panned out. Because some guys from 22 and 23, the past 2 draft classes, they just haven't had time yet. They haven't had the opportunities maybe that they needed, so it's kind of hard to judge them. But over 50% of these players taken at number 1, I would consider tier 1. And then just something else to note is that 11 of the 12 tier 1 players taken first overall were quarterbacks and edge rushers, which kind of fits with the rest of the list. It is a very heavily quarterback and edge rusher dominated list at first overall, just because those are kind of the highest valued positions, if you will. And then tier 2, the first pick was kind of middle of the pack for these tier 2 players. 9 out of 22 players fell into this category. You can see below everything where I've put the percentages. So you can see that tier 2 first overall pick is kind of middle of the pack. It's not the highest percentage, not the lowest percentage. And then a majority of those were QBs. And then in tier 3, we only have the one guy, and that is the man, the myth, the legend, Jamarcus Russell. Unfortunately for him, no QBs went within the next 4 picks, so no other QBs went in the top 5. Unfortunately, 2 Hall of Famers went at 2 and 3 in that draft class. So just a little unfortunate thing for him. Then we move on to the second overall pick. It had the lowest percentage of tier 1 players at just 6 of the 22 at 27%. And I think that makes sense. I think the second pick is often thought of as a consolation prize, and as much as teams try to act like it's not, it is. And in all of the scenarios where a tier 1 player was taken second overall, it was a different position than the player taken first overall. So those drafts were either just loaded, or the team picking first overall had a different need than the team picking second overall. And then in tier 3, moving on, the second overall pick had the second most players in tier 3, but only 4 of them. Only 4 of those 22 picks were what I would consider tier 3. And then just something to note, only one scenario and only one pick was the player taken second overall in tier 3 the same position as a player taken first overall, and that's Zach Wilson. So every other time that a player was in tier 3, it was not the same position as the player taken first overall. Then moving on to the third overall pick, this is where things really start to get interesting. This is where I think the curse can kind of be explained and where it's kind of evident. It's pretty middle of the pack for tier 1 players, which I think is a theme going forward, where it's kind of you've reached your status quo for top 10 picks, and the great players in those top 10 picks. It's kind of 40% of those picks will hit. And that's the same at pick 3, at pick 4, and at pick 5, kind of. We'll get into pick 5 in a bit. But in most of those cases where there was a tier 1 player, the player was taken at a position that had not been selected yet. So I think that kind of goes along with the reaching on a position that's already been taken within the top 3. And then in tier 2, oddly enough, the third overall pick has the lowest concentration of tier 2 picks. It's just 32%, 7 out of 22 players. But the reason for that is because it has the highest concentration of tier 3 players by far, 27% or 6 out of 22. I think it can be for many reasons that these players don't pan out. And obviously this doesn't apply to all of them, cough, cough, Trey Lance, but I think situation has a ton to do with it. And as a team with a third overall pick, oftentimes you're not good enough to compete and you're not good enough to have a solid team around the player you draft, but you also aren't high enough in the draft to get that blue chip guy that's going to completely change your franchise. And then just something else to note of these third overall picks, something I noticed here. Of the 9 players in tier 1, before 2010, all 5 were offense. So all 5 tier 1 players that were drafted before 2010 at the third overall pick were offensive in a time where I would consider defense to be more prevalent. And then it's flipped since 2010 when the league started to shift to offense. All 4 tier 1 guys were taken at defensive positions. And I think that's because of the valuing of these positions and of these players. I think teams spend less time scouting them than they do the offensive players. And when you start to see offensive players go at number 1 and number 2, you can kind of get a better defensive player at that third pick if you need it. Now we get to the fourth overall pick, where it kind of feels like teams start going best pick available instead of trying to reach on somebody to fix their franchise. And then of the 9 tier 1 players here, there wasn't any consensus position that dominated. And that's why I feel like it's starting to lean best pick available here, because it's not, fourth overall pick, we're taking a lot of quarterbacks or a lot of edge rushers like we are with the first and second overall picks. And so I think that because of the high-ish concentration, or the similar concentration of tier 1 players, that's why. And then it also seems like the fourth overall pick is a bit more standard deviation, mostly solid guys, a fair few busts, but it's a pretty even split of tier 1 and tier 2 players. And I think that's just kind of how the draft goes, because things are so hard to scout. And then moving to the fifth overall pick, this is where we get some intrigue. The percentages are very similar to the fourth overall pick, except for 2 guys who are just, kind of impossible for me to grade. And that is Eric Berry and Sean Taylor, the 2 guys in blue. Now, Eric Berry is by all means lived up to expectations. A safety taken at pick 5, but every single healthy season he played, he was a Pro Bowler. And in a majority of the healthy seasons he played, he was a first-team All-Pro. He was absurdly good. It's just the worst case of the injury bug that I think I've ever seen out of a player. And then Sean Taylor, obviously, rest in peace. And I can't really, I won't dog on Sean Taylor. I won't do it. So I put the percentage that I would consider if Barry and Sean Taylor are considered lived up to expectations, I put that in the parentheses. That's 50%. So we start getting into some more lucky hits with the 5th overall pick. And I think that kind of goes into best pick available. And we're getting more towards that the further we get from pick 1. So overall, I think that I don't think a draft pick is cursed. I think it's all just what scenario or what situation is the team in that's picking. And I think the closer to 1 you are without being at pick 1, the more you start reaching and grabbing at anything that might try to fix your franchise, because you are a bad enough team to have that 2nd overall pick. And obviously you have your outliers, and you have your 49ers picking in the top 3 a couple times that, they are a good team with a good coach, and they are well built, and they've hit on their draft picks. And I think scouting has a lot to do with it too. because it's such an inexact science. But I think if there were one pick that I would not want to have, it would actually be the second overall pick rather than the third, because even though the third overall pick has the highest percentage of busts, it has a pretty decent percentage of hits as well. And the second overall pick is just missing that tier one player. And so I think that whether it's teams just not doing well at scouting and ending up with a second overall pick and they're just, not great at it, or whether it's teams just grasping at straws, but I would definitely like to hear other opinions on this, because I feel like I just always hear, oh, this pick is cursed. Oh, that pick is cursed. Oh, you don't want this pick. Then your team's gonna suffer forever. And I just don't believe it. I don't buy into it. And so I wanted to kind of put together this list to see if I was crazy or if I was, kind of onto something with these picks not being cursed. But I can definitely see why people do think that they are cursed draft picks, or that they're bound to fail, because there is some evidence pointing to it. But I also do think that it's just it's all explainable. It's not like a random, oh, they're missing because it's just a like, because they got unlucky. It's no, they're missing because they're reaching on positions that have already been taken, or they're reaching on things to try to fix a team where they don't really need to try to fix their team. They could just take a better player. And that's evidenced by the times where there was better players taken after one of those tier 3 whiffs. In the case of Jamarcus Russell, Calvin Johnson, and Joe Thomas, obviously is really unlucky. But like I said, definitely let me know what y'all thought. And thanks for watching. Quick little draft curse video. I'll take it easy.